U.S. President Donald Trump says Canada is ripping off the United States and is threatening even more tariffs, posting online that tariffs on Canadian automobiles and car parts will increase to 50% on January 1st. Now that's on top of the 50% tariffs that came into effect on Friday night. But with the trade talks currently off, the Trump administration is pointing their fingers at Canada.
And what happened at the very end is they came in with a bunch of unreasonable last-minute demands. I frankly thought we had a deal. I think that we should have a deal. It's over. We expect fairness in our trade policy.
I think he would like Canada to come to the table and negotiate in good faith. They were offered quite a good deal last week. They chose to reject it.
In the last hours, I think there were things that the Canadians just, they wanted more. We offered them the best access to the United States of any country in the world.
Let's talk to the person leading Canada's side of the talks. Dominic LeBlanc is the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade. Nice to see you, Minister. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, JP. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, Minister, you heard Dominic, you heard President Trump there say today that Canada is among the worst nations in the world to deal with. He says we're entitled, and he says as a result, he's going to hit us with some more tariffs on cars and trucks in the new year, 50% up from the current 25%. What do you say to the president as he considers inflicting even more economic pain on this country?
So, JP, we have consistently decided that we're not going to respond to some of those sort of personal comments that either Mr. Trump or some of his cabinet secretaries make. We're going to remain focused on the Canadian economy and doing what we can do to protect the Canadian economy in the face of these unjustified tariffs. This all started, JP, remember, about fentanyl and border security. All of those issues were being addressed, have been addressed. Then it moved to a whole series of other questions. This administration has decided that it wants to fundamentally change the trading relationship with its most important trading partners. The Prime Minister said that clearly months ago, that we accept that the Americans are going to have a different focus in these trading relationships. And our job is to focus on what we can control, to do what is necessary to protect Canadian workers and businesses from these tariff threats. You're going to see further measures announced this week. The Prime Minister was clear on the weekend that we're going to take responsibility for protecting industries and workers. It's not their fault that Mr. Trump decided to add 50% tariffs on $28 billion of Canadian exports to the United States on the weekend. We saw, you're right, he made further threats today. We'll see over the next number of months what that looks like. But Canadians should know that we always had a plan to protect our industries and our businesses in the event there was no deal. So we're working on those measures as we're on the air tonight.
I know you don't want to dwell on the personal side of all this, but the president had some pretty personal attacks today for leaders in this country. He's again calling the prime minister governor. He called Premier Doug Ford a flunky. He said he's less impressive than his late brother, Rob Ford. The premier, in turn, called Trump a loser. He called him the king of bankruptcies. What do you make of this war of words, and are you concerned that this could really stymie any chance of ever getting to a deal with the Americans?
So, honestly, JP, we're not going to spend a lot of time commenting on who said what about whom. Canadians expect us to be firmly focused on what I said earlier, protecting the economy, protecting Canadian jobs. I think the Prime Minister said it well earlier today at an important defense procurement announcement around icebreakers in Quebec. If the Americans say they want to come back to a negotiating table with a real offer that is in the economic interest of Canada, that doesn't affect Canadian sovereignty, that gives us an opportunity to build with them a competitive North American economy, not as a branch plant of the U.S. economy, but as a proud sovereign country that's the best customer of the United States and can add value to North American competitiveness, sure. But we're not going to wait around for the phone to ring or wait around for a text message from somebody. We always had Plan A, JP, which was what we ran on in the last election, was to build a more resilient, competitive Canadian economy, to diversify our trading relationships. I'm going to Nunavut later this week for a meeting of internal trade ministers from all the provinces and territories to continue the work of removing barriers to real free trade in Canada. Those are things that we can control, that we can work on. And the Prime Minister's been clear with the whole government. We need to double down on that focus that we never lost and not be distracted by somebody's post on a U.S. social media network.
Do you expect the Americans to come back to the table first? Is that how this is going to play out? Canada is not willing to meet them face to face to try and hash out a deal until the Americans come calling. Do I have that right?
Again, who calls whom? We're not wasting time on that, JP. These negotiations were interrupted less than 72 hours ago. We are doubling down on the work that Canadians expect us to do. But we're not going to go back to a negotiating table unless we have a reliable sense that the fundamental position of the U.S. government is that we can have economically competitive sectors of our economy as important as automobiles, aluminum, steel, forest products. Unless there's a deal visible that puts us in an economically viable position in those sectors, we're not going to rush back to Washington.
Minister, can you pull back the curtain for us a bit and tell us why things fell apart? Because you were speaking to the media on Thursday. As you will remember, you said you were very close to a deal, and then the next day the Prime Minister told you walk away from that negotiating table. What happened in those intervening hours? Tell me why this deal was derailed, and maybe reveal what was so bad about it in terms of Canada's sovereignty. Speak to what was in the final text of this deal that had you concerned about the sovereignty of this country.
Yeah, so, and JP, I understand why you're asking the questions. We're not going to talk about particular versions of the text. We respect the commitments we make to the United States and to other trading partners around those kind of details. But you're right. We believed on Wednesday and Thursday that we were close to a deal that would have brought significant relief in the 232 sectoral tariffs to make Canada and Canadian businesses competitive and commercially viable by reducing those tariffs. On Friday, the Prime Minister, I think, in his comments on Saturday, used examples of the kind of things that during the day Friday suddenly appeared in the conversations or in various exchanges of documents that we thought had been resolved. So use the automobile example. We had always talked about the vehicle manufacturing sector in Canada as including medium and heavy-duty trucks. Those are the Ford F-250, F-350. They're the heavy-duty Silverado trucks that are made by GM and Ford in Canada. We obviously weren't going to accept tariff reductions on a basket of vehicles that didn't include those important production lines. We had discussed the importance of including Canadian parts in the calculation of what is the content of those vehicles. In the end, if those were not attainable, that is one example of where, in the Prime Minister's judgment, we didn't have an agreement that was in the economic interest of Canada. But you have to be careful. Steel and aluminum derivative products, another example. It's tens of billions of dollars for the Canadian economy. The tariff treatment of those products can't be any less than other trading partners. We have a big trade surplus with the United States in that area. So why would we ever accept to agree to a tariff structure that was not commercially viable for them? Those are two examples. You asked about sovereignty. The Americans started discussing at the end Canada's ability to enter into other free trade agreements with other trading partners, a key priority of Mr. Carney and the Canadian government, something we've done a lot of work on, made very considerable progress over the last number of months. So the idea that the United States would have a word to say in the sovereign decision of Canada to enter into a free trade agreement with another reliable trading partner obviously wasn't something that we were prepared to consider. So it was the cumulative total of a series of things that, as I say, started showing up in the conversations at the end that made the Prime Minister conclude, and properly so, that we didn't have in front of us an agreement that was in the economic interest of the whole country.
So you were negotiating with the USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, but also Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. And the Prime Minister said that while the Canadian team was quite unified, there was a lot of unity among you and the folks you were working with, the Americans were not. How did Mr. Lutnick stymie this process? Tell me how his interventions led to the failure of these trade talks.
So again, you're speaking in absolute terms, JP. We haven't ascribed one particular person responsibility on the American side. What the Prime Minister said, I think you said we were quite united. We were completely united in the sense that Madame Charette and I had clear instructions from the Prime Minister. There were multiple discussions with him a day in those last days. His Chief of Staff joined us for the last couple of days. There was zero incoherence or lack of unity on the Canadian side of the table. You're right, we've seen the speculation as to who intervened with President Trump or on the other side of the table. Our discussions with Mr. Greer, the trade representative, Ambassador Greer, were always professional. There was nothing personal in those discussions. He was representing the American interest. We represented the Canadian interest. Ultimately, there's one decision maker in the United States. It's Mr. Trump. Did some of his other cabinet secretaries intervene? That honestly is something that the American side can explain. Our work, daily, hourly work, was with Mr. Greer and the deputy U.S. trade representative who worked with Madame Charette. I've seen the speculation, and Mr. Lutnick has publicly said some things about his view of the Canadian auto industry, obviously, which for us weren't compatible with having a Canadian and North American integrated auto industry that brings the competitiveness to the North American economy that we thought the Americans wanted.
Mr. Ford in Ontario here was quite relieved that you didn't sign this deal, the deal that was on the table even before some of these last-minute changes we've been talking about. He said it was a bad deal and that accepting any level of tariffs on steel, aluminum, or autos, in particular, that would have potentially hobbled the industry here was not a good idea. It was a non-starter. Chrystia Freeland, frankly, said something similar, your former cabinet member. What do you say to those people who say accepting any level of tariffs on our goods sets a terrible precedent and that Canada should hold out for zero?
So we have worked collaboratively with all of the provincial and territorial governments. We had a number of meetings with the premiers last week, including again on Saturday. But the Prime Minister has also been clear, JP. The United States is imposing tariffs on all of its trading partners in violation of the CUSMA agreement that Mr. Trump himself signed and negotiated 7 years ago. They are applying tariffs across the board. If we are amongst the most integrated trading partner in those sectors, steel, aluminum, automobiles, softwood lumber, obviously critical for the Canadian economy as well, we have to be in a position where the tariffs charged to Canadian exports to the United States give us the best tariff treatment of other trading partners, put us in the best position as compared to other trading partners. I don't think it was realistic in those sectors to get to zero tariffs in the short term. President Trump has made that decision in violation of these trading agreements. Canada was negotiating in good faith to give us an agreement that ultimately wasn't there, that would have given us the best tariff treatment as compared to other trading partners, that would have been, for those sectors of the economy, something that was economically and commercially very significant. Absent that, obviously we weren't interested in an arrangement or in an agreement. We thought at some points last week that we may be able to reach that outcome, which would have put Canadian businesses in those sectors in a competitive and economically advantageous position. Ultimately, if the Americans weren't prepared to negotiate that arrangement, then Canada took its responsibilities.
Premier Ford is counseling the Prime Minister to levy retaliatory tariffs on American goods coming from essentially politically sensitive parts of the United States to inflict not only economic pain on the U.S. and President Trump, but also some political pain on the Republican Party as well. Is the government considering that sort of maneuver, given that the U.S. midterms are just 10 weeks away? Will you take this opportunity to punish the GOP?
So again, JP, I appreciate it's Monday evening. I think the Prime Minister and some of my cabinet colleagues may be announcing in the next day or so details of those measures. As much as I love being on your program, to scoop my boss the night before an announcement that he might make doesn't feel like something positive for me. And that work is ongoing in the sense those decisions are being made by the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, JP, in real time. I participated with François-Philippe Champagne, my cabinet colleague, the Finance Minister, in a meeting earlier this afternoon with all of the provincial and territorial finance ministers. So we're going to do that work on a serious basis. That very much is Mr. Carney's approach to these kind of decisions. He said on Saturday that one of the basic elements that needs to be considered is how do we protect industries in those sectors that now face these 50% Section 338 tariffs on top of the basket of other tariffs. How do we put in place measures that best protect the workers and the businesses in these sectors? So if it's steel and aluminum derivative products, if it's automobiles, if it's steel and aluminum, if it's softwood lumber, those are the kind of decisions that will be announced in the coming hours. But I think it's important also to note, JP, that the measures, the counter tariffs are one part of the work, and those measures may evolve over the coming months as the United States makes other decisions. So it's sort of not frozen in time, but there will also be important measures to support businesses and workers who are now facing this headwind through absolutely no fault of their own. This is a decision made by President Trump. So they expect their governments, Canadians do, plural, provincial, federal, and territorial governments, to work together to put in place the supports, as Mr. Carney said, as the Prime Minister said on Saturday, that won't be short-term, that will endure at least the end of this Trump presidency. And that's what we'll have to say in the coming hours.
I really only have a few seconds left here, Minister. I want to ask you about something the Prime Minister said on Saturday. And he said, when you're attacked, you're at war. Is that your assessment? Do you agree with the Prime Minister? Is Canada at war with the United States right now?
We're in a trade dispute, a trade war with the United States. It's something that they started. We were respecting our obligations under the CUSMA agreement. We wish they would return to that level of respect, but Canadians are proud and expect governments to stand up when we're attacked economically. And that's exactly what we will be doing over the next number of days and weeks. The Canadians should have no illusion that we were always prepared for a circumstance where there was no deal. And you're going to see in the coming hours the beginning of what that response looks like.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Minister of Canada-U.S. Trade, Dominic LeBlanc. Appreciate you making time for us, sir.
Thank you, JP. Have a great evening.
You too. Take care.